Okay, we are live with Craig Race, and Craig is here. Craig, we just have to give Craig kudos for coming in here because he walked in here without really knowing what he was walking into. It was Ryan. We have to call out Ryan because it's Ryan Fernandez, correct?
My colleague, yeah.
Your colleague.
I don't normally leave Toronto city limits, so
Oh, you're one of those people.
appreciate you guys having me here.
You're born in Toronto?
No, but I've lived there for about 20 years at this point.
20 years. Let me guess where you were born. You were born in out west.
I'll give you a hint. Hometown of Wayne Gretzky.
Oh, really?
Brantford, Ontario.
No way.
Yeah.
Wayne Gretzky Way in the 403, man. Holy smokes.
Spent a bunch of my life in Cobourg as well, so, I got the small town roots, but no one wants to hire me out there, so I got to take what I can take.
Yeah, probably because you're charging too much for your services. Your services are so elite.
My clients don't say that, but...
No, and I didn't mean to imply that your clients said that. I just mean that your skills are in such demand that Brantford isn't big enough town to capture you, Craig. So we wanted to dive in because we got introduced to you through Lanescape, and I know you have a bunch of other things on the go as well that we can kind of talk about. But can you tell us a little bit about, how did this journey with Lanescape begin, and what have you been through with Lanescape? Can you map this out for us?
Yeah, Lanescape began as a passion project between myself and originally my two partners, Alex Sharp and Andrew Sabara. The three of us saw what was happening in Vancouver with their Laneway policy. And in 2014, we got a one-off Laneway suite approved, just going through committee of adjustment, and it was expensive and it took forever, and you had to be a unique expert to get this kind of housing built in the city. But other cities in Canada were already doing it. So we thought, well, this is stupid. We should have an as-of-right policy that allows homeowners to just go apply for a permit and get one of these if they live on a laneway.
What was so on that first one, before we go further, what was the pushback? Like, why didn't Toronto at that point have Laneway as like an approved kind of housing opportunity?
Toronto is really lucky in that there's more people trying to do things than they need people to do things. So that means that just inherently our bylaws are behind current demand and, current building forms. So they're just old, and there's not a lot of, or there wasn't a lot of encouraging change coming from City Hall. That has actually shifted quite a lot in the last few years. But just at the time, they had single family housing policy, and that was it. And we saw a way to crack into that and take what Vancouver and Ottawa and a few other cities were doing and bring it to Toronto. So we got some councillors on board who believed in it as well. And Evergreen was sort of another partner who helped us with the policy and the public outreach. And 4 short years later, we got an as-of-right bylaw implemented that allowed anyone to build one.
How long ago was Vancouver doing this type of stuff?
Around 2008 was when their policy went into effect.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, we were 10 years behind them.
And so did you guys help write the policy that got implemented here in Toronto?
Essentially, our group, like Evergreen and ourselves, wrote a draft policy. That came out of quite a lot of public outreach. Like, we had public meetings and surveys and the like. So it was really a grassroots, crowdsourced vision of what a bylaw could be. But then city planning took that and refined it to make it the bylaw we work with today.
And so what are the bases of this bylaw? What can people do? What kind of property do you have to be able to do something?
Well, with a laneway suite, you just have to be on a public laneway. So there are about over 40,000 properties in Toronto that are on laneways. And that's pretty much it. Then your site dimensions dictate how big it can be. Very recently, they've also approved what they're calling garden suites, which are, if you're not on a laneway, you can put a detached home in your backyard. Same thing, it's fully as of right. You have to follow the prescriptive bylaw. If you have a big backyard, you're going to have an easier time doing it than if you're on a tight lot. But now anyone in Toronto can build a second home in their backyard.
I think the province is just announcing yesterday and today, I guess, the details of, I think they're mandating that across the province now, 3 units as of right. I don't know all the details, so I don't want to go too deep into it. Maybe you do, but I haven't looked at all the details around it. I know officially, I think the square footage can't change, and the facade of the house can't change, and that type of thing. So, I don't know.
Did they say anything about parking?
Yeah, I think around parking, it was that the municipality can't demand more than 1 spot per unit, right? But some places will already have different rules. Like, I'm sure Toronto probably doesn't have that rule because a lot of houses already don't have parking. right?
Yeah, Toronto's unique. Like we already had most of our neighborhoods allowed for triplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes, even apartment buildings was encoded into our bylaws. That wasn't quite as true in the periphery, like Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke, but this policy will allow anywhere to have a triplex now, essentially, which is fantastic news.
So what have been
But from what you know, when you're saying a triplex, you mean a triplex within the existing structure, not taking down, because if it's a small, home that's there, an old home, it's not taking that down and building like a 3-story kind of, small triplex building type structure. Is that correct?
I think that's right. The details aren't finalized yet.
Okay.
And with any of these policies, there's always details. Like there's things to get tripped up on. So I guess I'm going to stay in business, even though triplexes will be everywhere now.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
You're going to stay in business. Yeah. Toronto's going to need your services for a long time. So what are some of the challenges when someone is doing a Lanescape, a laneway housing? Is it like sewage? Like what are some of the things that you're like, oh, damn, this is going to be a harder project than we initially imagined? Is it getting some of the sewage lines connected to the street? Because the laneway has no sewage lines, correct?
Not talking about water or electrical. You're just right down to the shit right away.
Yeah, because when we built out this office, what is right under my seat here is the sewage line from the washroom that goes over there. Because when we built this out the way it is, so I literally sit on where they cut the concrete in this office.
A river of
the
crap.
Sewage line from the 3 washrooms that we have over here run right under here. There's too much information for you.
I'm good to know that wasn't you I was smelling.
No, yeah, that's just a feature of the office. But what are some of the? Is it that kind of thing? Because I would imagine building the structure itself. Not too complicated, correct?
So, I mean, this is one of the things about laneway and garden suites where it's expensive, it's hard, there are all these pitfalls, but it's also really cheap and really easy. You just have to remember you're building a house. To get to the root of the question, all services come to your lot wherever they come to currently. Usually your sewer, your water, gas and electric come to the front lot line. Mm-hmm. And from there, it's up to the landlord to take it to the house, into other units in the house, or to the laneway suite. So that's all just servicing solutions you need to come up with on your site. But, it doesn't require any unique applications with any of the utilities. It's just having a decent plumber and designer.
Okay, so most of the time it really is, can we dig an appropriate trench here to pull these to the back to get it to the laneway so we have electrical coming, sewage coming to the back?
That's right. And sometimes we need sewage ejectors and the like, but there's solutions for all these things.
What's that? That's like a pump to okay.
That's right, yeah. So if you don't have
sewage ejector, is that what it's called?
Yeah. Oh, so if you don't have gravity to take it to the sewer, there are pumping solutions for everything. And really these kinds of things aren't unique, at least in Toronto, because we're so used to building houses in tight spaces. Most contractors in the city are familiar.
They're familiar with that. Okay. And then what are some of the things that have surprised you? Like what are some of the biggest laneway housing that you've seen, square footage wise, or?
So as of right, for a laneway suite, you can do 2,400 square feet, including your basement. So you can do 2 stories above grade plus a basement, 1,700 above grade. Like we can do 6-bedroom laneway suites.
That's a nice,
fully as of right.
And you've done that?
We've done that. It's all dependent on lot dimensions. So only the big lots can accommodate that. But yeah, you can do that. No committee of adjustment, no development charges. Like it's really a user-friendly policy, which was something that we were advocating for when we were coming up with the vision for it. This was something that frankly wouldn't appeal to big developers. This was going to be homeowners. It was going to be kind of first-time investors and people who aren't that seasoned that need to be able to do this in a cost-effective and time-efficient way. So it's really homeowner friendly.
From when you guys started with this, specifically for the laneway suites, because the garden suites I think were just approved in Toronto earlier this year. Is that right?
That's right.
Right?
We can't take much credit for that policy, other than they're riding the wave of infill
you set
housing
the bar
that we like to think we kind of started nudging people towards.
So but specifically for the laneway ones, then from when it started until now, have you seen a consistent growth in interest in this? You have, right? So just more people reaching out.
That's right. Yeah, and especially now that garden suites are coming online, we don't have the official stats yet, but I think we're at almost 200 building permits a year being approved for laneway and garden suites. In Vancouver, they're at about 500 a year. So it wouldn't surprise me if once this policy hits maturity, we're seeing almost 500 detached secondary houses built in Toronto every year.
And
That's what's really cool about it. Like the way I like to contextualize that is that's 2 high-rise apartments just invisibly embedded into our low-rise neighborhoods that are being built by everyday homeowners. So it's really a policy that's enabling everyday people to essentially become a proactive group that are one of the biggest developers in Canada.
What about do you in the projects you've worked on? I know it's as of right, but do you seem to get pushback? Like, is there some neighbors are kind of concerned about adding those suites and things like that? Is it become a not so much a big problem because of the way the bylaw is? It's not going to stop you guys from doing it. But has there been some instances where it's just for the homeowner that's doing it, it's caused some problems for them?
Yeah, I mean, neighbors are neighbors, and you always have to be respectful of your site and your neighbors. Otherwise, you'll get into trouble with bylaw officers and the city and your neighbors. And some people are just nasty, like we've all experienced that with our projects. But for the most part, if you contain your mess nicely, then everyone's pretty.
So that's just over construction. What about concerns about, like, if you put a 2-story laneway suite, it's blocking light into their backyard or something? It's so typical, like any development, you're getting the same types of challenges, just on a smaller scale every day.
Exactly. I mean, that's just the repercussions of a growing city. So people are worried about it, but really the policy is written in a way that these are very respectful massings. Like, they're only 2 stories. They can only be a certain size. And like the big one I was mentioning, like getting to that 4 to 6 bedroom, you've got to have a huge lot to accommodate that. So it's not like you're putting that in a super tight neighborhood in the Junction or something. They're very contextually appropriate.
What is the most typical size?
Or 1,000 square feet, maybe 1,200 square feet.
One bedroom or 2?
It's not usually. It's only worth doing if you can get a 2-bedroom out of it, unless you're moving grandma in there, and then a 1-bedroom home office thing is just a good personal use scenario.
Yeah, and you mean by that, you mean the rents that the people will get, then the numbers start to make more sense.
Yeah, your revenue takes a huge jump at 2 bedrooms, just to justify the inertia of starting a project like that.
And is it always very common to be 2-story?
Pretty much. I mean, unless you have a really small backyard, and then a 1-story might make sense. But for the most part, 2 stories is achievable.
Always a basement?
Rarely a basement.
Okay, rarely. So just a slab.
Yeah, slab on grade. And the reason for that is you almost always have to shore to retain the soil if you're digging a basement, and that's extremely expensive. So adding a basement can cost like $250,000 added to your project, and the revenue you get from that bedroom you might get in there doesn't justify it in any kind of short term.
I feel like we're just peppering you with questions, but I'm curious. What's
coming?
What's the split between homeowner adding something for in-laws who are going to come back home or live with them versus someone adding a rental property to their space? What percentage do you think that is?
About half of our clients are just straight up landlords, like they want to have a long-term tenant move in. The other half are split between accommodating a family member or personal use. That grew a lot during COVID. Home offices, man cave,
home
that kind
office
of thing has kind of blown up a little bit.
I know a guy that built one to put a gym in his backyard for himself.
Oh, really?
Like a nice,
Isn't that
nice
just a
structure.
garage?
But because of the size and the way it's structured, it's not
got
like
it.
the size of it, and doors and windows and
We can split them up too. So like the ground floor can open up to the backyard and be your home gym, TV space, and then have a 1-bedroom apartment above it that's accessed off
beautiful.
the laneway. So it's really cool to have those multiple uses mixed into them.
Well, it changes the dynamics of the property you have in the city. Like if you're just able to do things now that you weren't able to do with your own lifestyle, with your own property, not just from an investment and income perspective.
Yep.
Right. It changes it. Like you said, a home office. Some people want to get out there and do yoga or something. Some people want to have a gym, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. So where is this headed? So that just means more and more. Toronto's just basically becoming we were just in Lisbon, and walking through the streets of Lisbon, it became very obvious to me that all the cafes on literally every corner of block upon block of city just had more density than Toronto had to me, because it was all 4-story buildings. Everybody was in a condo, but not tall condos, like 4-story kind of condos. Whereas Toronto has so much single family in the city proper, in the core of the city. This is just going to increase the density, and I would imagine just increase the amount of commercial services that are going to be in these cities. It just makes Toronto more global city and maybe a better city.
That's a great comparison. I mean, you think of those great historic cities of the world, like those were built before the car. And that's why they're so dense and livable. In North America, we built everything for the car, but now it's changing. Like in Toronto, planning doesn't care if you have parking when you go to committee of adjustment. Like they want a bike rack, but they don't care if you can put a vehicle there. Laneways were built for cars. Now we're putting people on them. Like it's almost like we've come back around to realizing that the livable features of a city are what we have to be investing in. And that's why these suites are so great.
It's funny because, when you come back from a European city and you come back here, well, I live in Oakville. So you come back to Oakville, you're like, okay, this really is suburban hell. This really is. Because a simple example, when you're in Europe walking around cities, you'll be out for the whole day. And, guys, I had a little Adidas. What do you call those things you put? Not a fanny pack. I was kind of
across
my chest.
Pack.
Okay, fanny pack.
fanny
pack.
Now I
don't wear it.
The more modern term is belt bag, but yeah,
they're
fanny
Okay,
packs.
so
yeah.
I had a fanny pack. I had a fanny pack, but not around my waist, across my chest. Just for anybody listening, I don't know. Around the waist seemed a little bit off, but around my chest. But because I had my sunglasses, and you have some cash with you, and you have maybe even like a battery charger for your whatever. And I was wondering, I'm like, why don't I need this in Toronto? And it's because my car is that. Like I always have my car everywhere I go. So if I have like a baseball hat and a charger or anything, it's just like always in my car. But in one of these great, to me, European cities, you're out for the day. You get around with the subway, like the subway system in Paris. Have you seen the Paris subway system map?
Oh, it's the best.
It's like it's spaghetti.
Yeah.
Like you
can get anywhere.
Yeah. Whereas in Toronto, I know the map is increased now. It almost looks like
it's really too like it's one line.
There's
east,
a bit.
west,
Yeah,
one
we
line
got
north,
some light rail stuff, and it gets up now to
Doesn't
Vaughan. What do they call the Vaughan area now? That city? I forget. They're calling it like Transit City. I think they're calling it Transit City up there. Subway gets all the way up there now. That's the 407. But you're right.
I lose track because it takes us 10 years to build 2 stops. I stopped counting.
Mississauga was hoping to get a stop to square one when we were kids.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about the subway. Anyway, but this to me is changing Toronto. And it seems to me that it's changing it for the better, although probably the residents would argue against me. I would think a lot of people would argue that, no, Tom, this actually sucks. It's bringing more people into the city. But the way I'm viewing the world, I think we need to go here.
I mean, people have different perspectives about what should happen to their neighborhood. We were talking before we started, like people are moving to Canada. Like we're a great country and we have great policies that mean we can't develop the Greenbelt. Like we need that space to ensure the vitality of our region. So that just means we have to intensify. And Toronto has a huge problem, as do most suburbs, where our low-rise neighborhoods have had stagnant to decreasing populations for decades. So every year, 20,000 people a year move to Toronto. They all move to high-rises and the avenues. And our neighborhoods have been deflating in population. That doesn't make any sense. And it's only entrenched homeowners further to resist that change. This kind of policy and multiplexes like the Ford government announced and others are just a good way to take that house form, keep it in the shape that's sensitive and livable, but put more people in it. It just makes sense.
Why don't you early when we started, you were talking, you said you don't really leave the city much. And I'm just curious, why? Is it just because you don't have business outside the city or just no real reason to, or any other reasons? And I have a point to all this. I'm just curious.
I personally leave the city all the time.
Oh, okay.
In terms of business though, we've looked at getting into markets like Hamilton that has a laneway policy now, Guelph, Cobourg, Brantford, everywhere has secondary suite policies. From our perspective, we can't scale in those markets. We might get a couple projects a year, but that's not enough for us to template a design process and staff up and train everyone on a different bylaw. We can do 100 a year in Toronto and not have to worry about
the growth
that.
opportunity in Toronto for these guys is still so big.
No, yeah, I meant him leaving. And the reason I was asking is because when you were talking about everything being designed for the car, it's just with as population has increased over the last, let's not say 10 years, just in the last 5 years, getting into and out of the city at any time of day is a drastically different experience. It's almost not worth it. So if you're able to create these more livable communities where there are these more of the cafes you were talking about in Europe, if you get more density that can support those types of businesses, it makes the whole experience of living in the city just better overall. right? That's the difference, because we have the flipping 401, which is a nightmare to drive on at the top of the city. We have the Gardner at the bottom, and that's it. Like, to get into the city, like, those are your two options, and they both suck. And there's nothing new that's coming down the pipe, right? So that's why it can almost really kind of, in some ways, it's not that it's a dead city by any stretch of the imagination, but it can revitalize the city in ways that it maybe hasn't had the same energy or community in the past, or maybe it did have it in the past, but it's kind of been lost because of the way it's been developed.
And I think it's also strangely healthy for the population, because if we're going to meet up with somebody in Oakville or Mississauga, like, just get from Oakville to Square One right now, you're not going to meet somebody for a 20-minute coffee, because just to get to Square One from here is going to be a nightmare. Mm-hmm. You don't know what's happening on the 403, but in kind of a livable city with high density, and if everyone are working close to where they're living, you're going to cross paths with, it's like going to London, England, and everyone's kind of having a beer at 5:00, because then they can easily get home on however they're getting home. They live fairly close. Like, I know they're suburbs of London, but I mean, Toronto could benefit from that, because you cross paths with your friends more often. You can cross paths for breakfast. You can have a quick lunch, and it's not just tied to your coworkers. Your friends and family are working all their I think it just produces healthier personal interactions that are more common, instead of planned, like, hey, next 3 Tuesdays from now, we'll meet for lunch at this place. It's kind of like a disaster.
Well, in a lot of U.S. cities, like, the one that stood out to me is, I remember the first time I was in Atlanta, and I was like, oh, Atlanta, this big city. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be so cool. And when you go to downtown Atlanta, after the workday's over, the city empties out. Like, there's nothing.
5:30, it's closed.
Yeah, there's like nothing going on in the city, and it just surprised me. I was like, wow, I can't believe this. So, like,
you're talking about Ottawa too, but I don't want to talk.
Well, Toronto's got a leg up on that, you know, but it can make it, even to your point, it increases the community aspect of it. I think that maybe might be a little bit lost. I don't live in the city. I don't know, you know what I mean? But I feel like there is the positive benefit to it for sure.
Yeah, people are starting to value that, I think, and it's showing up in the way they vote for governments that are implementing triplex mandates. And
you think so? Yeah,
absolutely. And even your clientele and your network, like, these are people who are building businesses around taking our suburban areas and turning them into life-filled, livable communities. So it's something that's happening, and it's not going to stop.
When you said garden suites, are you seeing anything that's surprising you with garden suites, or is it still so early that it's just kind of what you expected?
The only thing that frustrates me about it, because, in terms of the solution, it's the same typology, same construction solutions, like very similar pro formas as Laneway Suite. What frustrates me is the zoning bylaw is not as well written. And my theory on that is that it's because the private sector wasn't involved in its creation. So it's
easier to block?
Well, the planning department did a really good job of reaching out to neighborhood associations and really crowdsourcing the idea for garden suites. But
for Laneway Suites or garden suites?
For garden suites.
Okay.
We did for Laneway Suites as well, but we were at the table along with the city.
Okay, so the city
led to an efficient bylaw that is really easy to design to. Garden suites, there was no private sector leadership at the table. We had weigh-in, but we weren't helping craft the policy. And that's led to a lot of duplicating policies, like different bylaws that overlap and add complication that I don't think has resulted in better forms resulting out of it.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised that if the government couldn't get something done efficiently and the first time. It's really shocking. I know you're not knocking them. I'm knocking them. So
and they do deserve credit. I mean, it was done efficiently and with really good outreach. It's just the perspective that the planning department brings is different than the private sector, and that's why people who are involved in the implementation of these things need to be active in the creation.
Yeah, you need to combine the theory with the real life implementation to get a proper kind of set of guidelines.
Yeah.
Because if you just do things based on theory, then you miss the real world side of it. It never really works out, And if you just do it based on like, well, this is going to be the easiest way to do it, and there's no one cares about neighborhoods and that type of stuff, that can be bad too, because there's a lot of people that would just jam 14 garden suites in one backyard and right. So
yeah,
you must feel good. I know there was a group of you and there was another company or organization there too. Like, it was a group, but you must feel pretty good. You had a pretty big impact on the city of Toronto with what you've done. Like, just personally, that must feel pretty cool. Like, Toronto is a major city, and you are impacting the way it's evolving.
I'm so proud of it, and
Yeah.
I'm depressed by it because I'll never do anything better.
Yeah.
peaked
That was the
early,
peak.
guys.
You peaked. You peaked. You're young. You got a few more peaks in you. But I was going to ask, what else? As an architect, you mentioned that you do some other things with your company as an architect as well.
Yep.
What do you do? And I'm curious, as you know, what's your focus there and why? So can you describe that?
So, I mean, all the partners at Lanescape, we have side businesses. I have another architecture firm. We all do infill developments where we really put our money where our mouth is when it comes to putting apartments and other kinds of infill housing into Toronto. My other firm goes beyond Laneway and Garden Suites. We focus on multiplexes and neighborhood infill apartment buildings. And that's an area that I think is a new frontier for Toronto. We're starting to see new Main Street development policies and other kinds of infill policies come into effect where we can do more aggressive multi-unit buildings, and planning supports it. And
So can you describe that? Because I feel surprised to hear that. Like Toronto, I think of multi-unit when I think of Toronto. So what are you talking about specifically? Can you illustrate something?
well, one of the biggest forms that our clients are asking for these days is a fourplex in the main house and a laneway or garden suite in the back. Sometimes fiveplex, sixplex, et cetera, in the main house, but the house shape, but more than a triplex, because once you hit 5 units, you can get commercial financing, and it's just allowing our clients to make a jump from that like homeowner space.
Oh, got it.
into
Okay.
More of a commercial investor. So that's something that's blowing up a lot. And in the last 2 weeks, our office was involved in 2 apartment projects that were just like 2 house lots on a main street, but not on an avenue, that our client merged and got almost 30 units approved on.
Oh, wow.
So those kinds of things were unheard of 10 years ago, even 5 years ago.
Because they just couldn't get it approved at the city.
There was resistance from the committees that you have to go through to get approval. Councillors didn't like them. Neighbors were voraciously opposed to them. Like everyone was opposed to it. But we're seeing a tide change where leadership in the city is trying to embrace it. Developers are seeing potential with it, and homeowners are split.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
those 30 units. What kind of building is it?
That'd be a
5 stories?
five-story apartment building.
Yeah. Okay.
5-story
think-
apartment building.
And I think that's what we're going to, we've kind of looked at that too. And that seems to be the missing gap in Toronto. Not everything has to go high rise all the time, but
Yep.
they can increase the density at a normal rate with some of these types of projects that Toronto really has a lack of compared to other cities with the similar population and that when the population was growing, they kind of implemented a lot of these things and had some of these solutions where we've really, you would know better than I do, but there's just a lot of areas like in the yellow belt that they call the yellow belt that's really just single family, or you go to the core and it's high rise.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just very few of these areas where you do get these 3, 4, 5-story buildings. There are, like on Weston Road, there's a strip and that type of stuff, but overall they're just harder to get. And I think that's going to be a growing area for sure, I would imagine.
Exactly. We've had a tall and sprawl situation for a long time.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't hear that term. That's good. Yeah.
Everyone's talking about the missing middle in Toronto these days, and even council has been putting forward efforts. They call them the EHON efforts, the enhancing housing options in neighborhoods, where they're writing policies to allow this kind of thing. And what's exciting to me about that is before you could build a house or you could build a high rise, it's hard to make the jump. Now we've got, you can start developing houses and laneway suites and then do multiplexes and then do small apartment buildings and then mid-rise buildings. So like I'm working with clients who I wouldn't be surprised if when I retire, they're building high rises because they can slowly grow and
Graduate
stay
to
in
the
the same city.
What
If this is, sorry to cut you off, but if this approach, because now that so many stakeholders are talking about it, and from a government level, they've changed their tune a little bit, and the population challenges and the lack of kind of just housing options in the city has been ongoing for probably at least a decade, and really over the last probably 2-3 years, people have gotten serious about talking about it.
Yep.
But if this is done right, I just really look at it as an opportunity for Toronto. I think it can be really cool. I really think it can change the dynamics of the city, and a lot of areas that are a little bit kind of not in favor now go through some gentrification with this process. it could be really cool. Like when Mike and Luke were talking about at the event, they're doing some things in the Scarborough area, which is, for a long time people are like, oh, let's just stay away from that area.
Mm-hmm.
But if you kind of redevelop some of these areas properly, it can lead to just more diverse, dynamic, kind of lively neighborhoods, which I think would be really, really cool. If done poorly, it can go to crap really quick too. But it seems like there's thought being put into it at least. So, but if they push it too fast, it might get squirrely, right?
Yeah, and the waves are crashing. So what's happening in Toronto is starting to expand to the secondary markets and really across the whole greater Golden Horseshoe. So like we were talking about the Hamilton Laneway Suite policy, like all these other smaller towns that now have detached housing policies. It's only a matter of time before they started leaning into multiplexes, whether that's because they're being forced by the Doug Ford government or if they're doing it willingly. But either way, it's going to expand, and we're just going to see it change our province.
What kind of lot is it that someone can do a sixplex on with a laneway on the laneway on the back? Obviously, you need the laneway, but what size of lot am I looking at here?
I mean, it depends on how small you want your units to be. We've done them on lots that are 15 feet wide and 120 feet deep.
Wow.
And obviously, the bigger you go, you start to get
what's comfortable for you?
You've really built a multis on things that are 15 feet wide?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy.
I don't want to say,
that's tight.
I don't want to say his last name, but Mike in Toronto, when he built his house,
yeah,
like that lot was like 18 wide.
No, I know. I know there are some really tight lots there. I just didn't know for that type of structure.
Yeah.
Well,
sometimes I've walked by a house and I'm like, I just want to measure this with my feet. How wide is this lot? Because some of them you just look at from the outside. I'm like, this is narrow, boy.
Yeah.
Coming from, especially when you're used to the suburbs on such a long, for a long period of time, right?
It takes good design. That's something I really see the difference between me and my competitors who are successful at executing multiplexes and the ones who aren't. Are the ones who know how to do direct entrances from the street, no secondary exits, no elevators. Like your net assignable ratios just go through the floor as soon as you need a second exit on a unit. So you really have to be clever about how you design them to make sure that A, you get rentable space out of that relatively tight volume, and B, you don't have those maintenance and operating costs on a building that you've only got 4 units in.
Mm-hmm. And then the one for a 5 level that you mentioned earlier, that requires an elevator?
Yeah, once you get really up to like 4 stories and more, you kind of have to have an elevator. So that's when things change a little bit.
Got it. You kind of have to, or you have to?
I mean, there are always solutions to do weird stacked 4-story units, but it gets kind of dumb at a certain point. It's hard to market like a super narrow stacked unit.
Yeah.
For accessibility, wouldn't you have to, like, when does that come into play? Because I know just even for our office here, there's, one of our bathrooms is, you could fit 3 you could fit 3 bathrooms in there.
Commercial's a little different, and once you hit a certain number of units, you do have to have barrier-free provisions. But as long as you're just in the multiplex scenario, you can usually avoid that.
And then, as an architect, I can imagine that you have a vision for how you would think the city should evolve. And it sounds like you're pretty positive on some of these changes. But what else comes to mind for you, just when you look at Toronto and you're like, why aren't we doing this?
Well, I mean, for me, it's sustainability. Like I when on my own projects, I really invest in a good building envelope. Not necessarily because I want to save the world, although that's nice to do, but because, it lowers your M&O, and the comfort is really the big difference. Like in our custom homes where people are spending a lot of money on airtight, well-insulated envelopes, you can feel how comfortable it is in the winter. I think as energy prices continue to increase and we go to a more carbon-free energy system, you're going to see that become a bigger priority.
How are you building the envelope of the houses in that type of description? What's different?
So the trick is airtightness, really. Our building code is pretty good in terms of the amount of R value you need in a wall, your insulation value, and also the fact that we have to have continuous insulation, not just thermally broken insulation between the studs. But if you just do code minimum insulation and then actually focus on airtight construction, doing a blower door test that gets a decent score, like your heating loads drop 30 to 40%. And that's where that comfort really starts to be felt by the occupants.
What's some of the material to get the airtightness? We grew up in old construction where it was like, put some insulation, put some vapor barrier, throw some drywall on this thing.
I mean, it starts with detailing, like having expansive attics and big overhangs usually makes it
Oh,
hard
got it.
to get an airtight wrap around the occupiable space. But then also it's, just having trades who know how to apply tapes and sealants in a way that is actually going to have an effect on a blower door test.
And when you're saying it's more comfortable, you just mean the temperature inside the house isn't raising and dropping. It's just staying very steady. You're using less energy to maintain it, and it's staying very even. So I'm getting a nice comfort feel from the house.
It's something that's really hard to understand until you've felt it. Like I try to explain it to people, and it's just impossible. Like, you got to come stand in my house, ideally naked, but we'll become better friends before that happens, and go stand beside the window, and like, you won't feel a draft off the window, and the inside surface temperature of your walls is above 18 degrees, so you don't feel any radiant cold from it. It's really hard to describe, but once you've lived it, you never go back.
The one thing, so when we refinished our basement last year, a couple of years ago, we did spray foam insulation everywhere. I'm like, so it really makes that much of a difference, right? And especially in the basement, because they get in all the joists and around all the kind of pipes and everything. And I swear, in the winter, the basement might be warmer than the main floor because the way it's insulated. And what happens is, because the furnace, through the vents, not be like, I close most of the vents in the basement, but because the vents, like just from the furnace room, get heat up, it will heat up the rest of the basement, and it just maintains the heat so well that
Even the floor?
Yeah, well, we raised the floor, so we did put a subfloor. But yeah, it's weird. Like, we can comfortably go down in the basement in the middle of the winter with not much heat going on, and you could be in just a t-shirt and be comfortable.
Well, and that's a big knock-on effect. When you have a good envelope, your HVAC system has to be designed for that. Otherwise, you get overheating and things.
Which is, so ours wasn't designed for it, because then in the winter, so here's the flip side to it. In the summer, our basement is like abnormally cold because it holds all the cold. Already the basement's cold when the air conditioning's running, because it holds it so much in the summer. Like, it's
venting.
flipping freezing down here. Yeah, it's like too much.
Got it. So Craig, in your description, what kind of windows are you talking about here that are going to give you that type of air quality?
I mean, in our custom homes, we use like imported from Europe, triple pane,
Okay,
passive
got it.
house certified windows.
Doors too, imported from Europe?
I mean, it's nice if you can do that.
Yeah.
That's where you're really talking like super.
Because anyone listening,
super-
we the doors on my house right now are from Germany, and when these things arrived, I'm like, the construction on these things, they're like a bank vault. First of all, they're like a bank vault. They seal beautifully, and they just feel like they're going to last a million years.
Oh yeah, didn't a police officer? Weren't they canvassing your home for something? Something happened in the area, and they wanted a video, and they said something about your doors.
I think you're right. They said, you have no problem with these things. No,
I'm definitely biased towards Europe. As soon as I hear like imported from Europe or imported from Germany or something, I'm like, oh, quality. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. I don't know why, and I think it's because of some of the things that the place we have in Croatia there, just the windows and doors, and like the first time I experienced like the build quality of those ones compared to what we typically get here, I'm like, what the heck?
The door we have on our condo in Croatia literally has, they must be an inch thick, like metal cylinders that come out in probably 6 spots on the door, like maybe 8 spots. So when you lock the door, you lock it one way, but then if you crank the handle up, those cylinders are like 2, I think it might be 8, it's like 2 up, 2 down, and 4 on the side.
Like
nobody is, and then it's cement all around this door. Like, no one is getting through that door. Like, you lock that door and it's done. And I would imagine the air quality, the way it seals too. No air's going back and forth.
Yeah. Well, that also pulls it against the seals, right? When you
exactly.
when you do that,
Yeah.
so it makes it even more airtight.
Whereas here from the builder, if you go to the top, I didn't know this, but someone, the guy that gave, one of Dan's guys came when I redid my front doors. He's like, look at the builder doors. And he pushed in the top corner. It was the best sales pitch ever, because he just pushed in the top corner of the door and it literally just bends in, like not hard.
It's like a quarter
and it
inch,
bends in. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, we invest in quantity in North America, not quality. And that's also starting to change, like especially in Toronto, where you can only get so much space on your lot. Eventually you've maxed it out and you can start spending money on sweet speaker systems and triple pane windows and those quality things.
Craig, you described the inside of the house, like what you like as an architect to see. What about the exterior appeal of a city, or what you see? I notice a lot of your stuff has, to me, what I would call a modern look. Maybe that's too simple for what you're describing, but what do you think a city should look like from the exterior with all these changes in what we're building?
Well, I mean, obviously design is subjective. I lean towards the modern to aggressively contemporary design aesthetic. But the reason I have for that is because to achieve a good building envelope, brick doesn't make sense anymore. Brick needs a big either steel or concrete lintel to sit on, and that means thermal bridging through your wall. It's super expensive, and we just don't need it. Like, we have insulation and structure behind the brick. Hung cladding is the way to go, whether it's wood or metal or even stucco solutions.
Does stucco hold up in Canadian winters?
Depends on the spec, but it can, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's one thing I always wondered when I see people re-stucco a part of their house or the whole thing. I've always wondered, I'm like, isn't that thing that's just going to get destroyed with all the freezing and thawing?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's rationale behind what you would call a modern house that just makes functional sense for construction and operation, which is why our work is modern. I mean, the zoning bylaws in Toronto for a laneway suite require a flat roof pretty much. So we're just doing boxes, and it's hard to make a box look like a traditional home. And it wouldn't make sense to from like a wall assembly and a construction perspective. So we lean into modern design, and there's a reason for it.
Yeah, your stuff looks beautiful. So does that mean we're going to see more and more prefabbed built like in a factory, driven on site and assembled on site as a model of construction here in Toronto?
Oh, definitely. I mean, prefabbers are popping up all over Ontario. There's a few we work with. On laneway suites, it's usually a challenge. It's usually not worth it, because you've got a 3 meter wide laneway with two 90-degree turns. So getting a truck to the site.
So you're talking about the whole structure is prefabbed.
Yeah.
I was talking about panels that you would assemble.
Well, that's what I mean.
Oh, okay.
The biggest panel you can fit down a laneway is usually pretty small. And that leads to a lot of redundancies in structure and difficulty in assembling. So it costs you more. It maybe saves a little bit of time, but it's just not worth it in most cases on those super tight lots.
I know this will vary greatly. I'm just curious. What's the cost of a laneway suite? An average? What did you say? The most popular one is about 1,000 or 1,200 square feet or something like that. Or
yep.
So like, are you 150, 200, 250? Like what?
Oh, more than that. What's frustrating is if you'd asked me this question prior to COVID-19, I would have said like $300,000 to $500,000 is your development budget, like all in soft sand hards and contingencies and taxes. Now it's like $500,000 plus for any laneway suite, no matter how small. Materials are crazy. Construction costs are through the roof. Yeah. So fortunately, the soft costs haven't changed much. Design fees are still, I think, relatively unchanged. There's no development charges on these, so it's all construction related. Hopefully that'll rebound.
Do you know what I haven't looked into? And laneway suites have been around longer, and we've been talking about this specifically with garden suites because of some of the areas that we're in. We're just seeing the growth of garden suites now. And I'm just curious of what kind of price lift or value lift to that lot that extra suite's going to. So, you're putting $500 for the extra suite. Maybe you don't get the all $500 back in the price lift. Maybe it's $400, maybe it's $300, maybe it's $600. I don't know.
I think until the banks step up, you're not getting much.
I know, but
that's the magic question.
Yeah.
And that's a question most people don't ask. Like, a lot of us say, how much is it? $500,000 for a little laneway suite? No way. It's like, well, that'll rent for $4,000 a month. Like,
the
revenue can carry it in almost all cases. And also, just when you look at construction costs, if you go buy a condo of equivalent square footage, it costs twice as much as building a laneway suite. So
yeah, that's a good point. I don't think I've ever thought of it like that, especially with Toronto numbers.
Toronto numbers, if you're building a new house, you have two homes instead of one.
The way I like to characterize laneway and garden suites to people in Toronto is that it's the best investment you can possibly make in Toronto real estate, but you still have to be comfortable investing in Toronto real estate. Mm-hmm. So as long as you've overcome that barrier, you'll never get a better deal than one of these.
Yeah, because if you're going to spend $500,000 on a condo or $500,000 on one of these, like you already own the land. Instead of buying, I'd have to do the numbers, but it seems like it makes more sense.
When the banks catch up and finance these things and look at a property with an extra building on it and then kind of value the property differently, that's going to open up more development for you for sure in the city. Because right now I feel like the banks are trailing. Like you bring somebody a property like this and they're just kind of shrugging their shoulders. They're not really valuing it too much different. And because it's not a straight income property like they kind of define them, they're not looking at the revenue that it's bringing in either. So
no, you're right. But if you think about it, if you do this, so you have this property, you've spent $500,000. That gives you, let's call it $4,000 a month. So it's about 10% of what you spend. So you get 10% of your money back every year. That alone is kind of attractive from an investment return, just that. And then if someone's buying the home with a $4,000 stream of income potentially, there's got to be a structure. There's got to be value associated with that. And once they catch up, that's what's going to be the most interesting thing because that gives the possibility of it really just looking like, or at least early on being like, wow, there's a real opportunity here to kind of.
And there is a gap there right now.
Yeah.
Like our clients who have success with these are savvy in, getting the rental agreements in place first and then just relying on the income to refi. Flipping doesn't make sense for Laneway suites right now or garden suites. But we have no idea what the equity appreciation is going to be because none of them have gone to market. So
And your clients,
why would you? If you've built one like that, just keep that sucker forever, man.
yeah, so it's impossible to really know what someone's willing to pay for it.
Yeah, and the majority are investors, your clients. I know there's some homeowners,
Yeah.
but what would the split be? You think
We
investors?
just asked that
Half and
question.
half.
Yeah.
Oh, did you say?
Okay.
I missed that. I tuned out.
Yeah.
And of that, like the majority of our clients are all people who live in the main house. Like I would say maybe a quarter of our clients are just straight up investors who have they bought a property and they want to slap a Laneway suite on it. Most live there or want to live in the Laneway suite or somehow personally associated with the property.
But I guess all the regular CRA rules apply. Like if you're taking money out of your home to build a income property, just because it's on your own property, I guess that's all still tax deductible from a CRA point of view. Because if you bought a rental property, that's an investment. So the
You can write it down. Yeah, there's HST rebate programs, the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause it's a new structure.
Yeah.
New.
So what about and then development charges in Toronto? Can you comment on? Is that what?
They don't apply to Laneway suites.
So nothing applies to Laneway suites. But if you're building if you're building what you described before, it does. If you're taking two lots, putting them together, you still have development charges.
So Toronto's enacted some changes recently to the DC bylaw where you can do 4 units in the main house and a laneway or garden suite and essentially pay no development charges. It's still changing, but that's the gist of it. When you get above that, you are paying DCs. And certainly if you're talking about like a 20 or 30 unit apartment building, you're paying DCs on that.
Wow, that's a lot of changes in Toronto. This seems and like Craig.
You know your stuff, man. Because I feel like normally we've just been peppering you with questions.
Yeah. And nobody has the
Not
answers.
as dumb as I look.
Yeah.
It's a little surprising.
I
Brantford, Ontario apparently produces some smart people. But so Craig, if people are going to engage with you on a laneway housing, is it just going to what does that process look like just from a timeline point of view?
So
like they hit your website and they reach out to you. What is it? Where does it go from that?
So step one is send us your address. Even if it's a listing you're looking at, we provide free property assessments to anyone who wants them. So we've done thousands of them
In
across
Toronto proper.
Has to be in the city of Toronto.
Okay.
Laneway and garden suites, just send us the address and we try to turn around a property report in about 24 hours. It's basic, but it gives you the gist of how big you can build, any potential pitfalls to look out for, some sample floor plans.
Oh, wow.
It's a free service we provide that hopefully really our goal is to educate the public and be a free resource to help developers and homeowners avoid being taken for a ride by other people who don't know what they're talking about. But also, if you want to hire us, we can explain next steps on just hiring us to be your architect. We're a fee-for-service business. We get your design and approvals, and then you can go find a builder and construct it. We're actually launching a construction company that hopefully will start building our own.
That what it seems like it would
slowly.
make sense.
And, we have a lot of great builders who our clients love working with, but our goal is to do 100 designs and approvals a year. There aren't enough builders to fulfill that demand. So we just have to do it in order to keep constructing these things.
Oh, wow. That's going to age you quickly, but thanks for being of service to the city. We really appreciate it and to the population.
Are you going to manage the property? Are you going to manage the suites for people afterwards as well?
I mean, we have high aspirations. We'd love to do management, develop them ourselves. The sky's the limit on this. We're all in on neighborhood development in Toronto, and, we want our clients to be too.
Oh, that's pretty exciting. Awesome.
is, yeah.
Good for you guys. And then how would someone, timelines, I know with COVID and supply chains, but now supply chains are a bit better, but energy, it's a wild world. But if you were to ballpark it for someone, they reach out to you until it's actually completed. What are they looking at?
If you've got your stuff together, from the day you reach out to us to the day you get the keys to your Laneway suite is a year. Most of our clients take a year and a half. It's 6 months for approvals, 4 months if you move fast, and then between 6 months and a year for the construction.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you're going to see all kinds of wonderful things because if people are doing cool garages with a suite over it, I mean, some of the stuff that you're going to see over the next few years is going to be incredible. This is, I think for Toronto, this is exciting stuff. This is probably the most positive I've heard on Toronto's development and housing needs in the years we've been doing this. No?
Well, I mean, we were talking before we started, everyone was going to secondary markets before because it was way cheaper to buy and revenue was not that much lower. Like now that's changing, I think, like the DC changes and just the fact that houses in Collingwood cost more than Toronto now is going to bring people back to the
Don't
city.
make fun of Collingwood. We just bought there. We don't need
I go there almost every
I'm
weekend
joking.
with
Yeah,
my
yeah,
in-laws.
yeah.
I love Collingwood.
It is ridiculous.
Shout out to
He
Collingwood.
walked back that pretty quick. All right, Greg, we're on board.
I'm not knocking it.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just
yeah,
saying
yeah.
Toronto is suddenly becoming attractive.
Totally. It makes sense. And I think I'm just going to bring it back to the financing. As soon as some bank at some point is going to say, hey, we will finance these builds.
Well, and what other city do you have $3 million comps for a multiplex? Only in Toronto. Need an appraiser to put that in a report.
Yeah. This is going to change. It's interesting times. Toronto's got a bright future. I'm positive on Toronto again. Craig, you've changed our thinking on Toronto.
Well, let's get a coffee in a Laneway one day, and we'll talk about the future for our clients.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate you. Oh, and then for your other, you've talked about kind of Lanescape, but your other, if someone was interested in saying, hey, I do want to get like 2 lots and build something in Toronto, they reach out to you differently for that one?
Yeah. So my other firm is just called Craig Race Architecture.
Craig Race Architecture. Yeah. So if you Google up Craig Race Architecture, the website for that is
craigrace.com.
Okay. Cool.
With Lanescape, we have a team set up, so that's very systematized. My other firm that does multiplexes and apartments and custom homes, that's more boutique, and you're just working with me directly on that one. So hopefully we'll get along well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, I'm sure he seems like a great guy. And are we not asking anything that we should be asking in this regard in this area?
I mean, I think we covered a lot.
Yeah.
It's exciting. Like Toronto's exciting. People are right to be scared of it and to love Hamilton and other markets, but I think it's changing. So it never hurts to get a free property report and see what's possible.
Well, I think it supports the whole area. Like if Toronto improves its housing, I think it acts as a pillar for the whole Golden Horseshoe. Like this is a positive for everyone, because I think for a while, to me, I felt like people are escaping Toronto and that like nothing's getting done, no new development, no hope. There's just going to be another condo around the Sky Dome or the Rogers Center or whatever it's called. And that's it. So this is kind of like encouraging for the city, for me anyway. I feel like it's bringing some excitement back to Toronto.
I agree. I feel like what you said has a lot of merit as well. Like I think, when the price gap in some other areas were greatly different than the price in Toronto, so you could buy and generate, relative to price, just a decent amount of income compared to Toronto. So the cash flow numbers, things like that, were better in a lot of other areas, and maybe they are still in some other areas, but. Toronto, the vacant, like you're not in Toronto, and a lot of the real estate world really revolves around the city, whether people like it or not. That's the way it works. So it's almost like the condo and like the high rise, low rise pricing in Toronto. Like as when the high rise, there's too much of a premium on a low rise compared to the high rise. Generally, you see that kind of correct, and you see the market in low rise really slow down, and the market in high rise pick up, and prices kind of will increase, or that gap closes again. And when it gets too close, people are like, well, why am I going to buy high rise for just this much more? If I can buy low rise, and you kind of see that. And I feel like we're at this point where, with especially maybe COVID sped it up, that price increases in all these other areas have made some people look like, well, if I'm going to spend $600,000-700,000 over here, maybe I just spend a couple extra $100,000 and I look at Toronto as an option instead now, versus it's $500,000 extra, whatever the number was before, right?
Yeah.
Craig, thank you so much for doing this, and a shout out to your colleague there, Ryan, who I think listens to the he listens to the podcast, I think, and he reached
Ryan
out.
Listens, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Ryan.
You guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ryan. Get well soon. He's sick at home, unfortunately, but we'll get him back.
Yeah. Cool. Greg, thank you so much. Really appreciate this.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. You can find every new episode of the Your Life, Your Term show on all the major streaming platforms. So Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. And if you'd like to get free copies of some of the books that we've put together, like these right here, or some of the reports that we've put together, like these right here, you can find all of those at www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's it for now. Until next time, your life, your terms.